Here's a question that's very appropriate for Easter week. Someone writes in that their brother is not impressed with Jesus dying on the cross because how could dying for only 3 days pay for our sins when someone who doesn't believe spends eternity in hell? How would I answer that? Well, this actually is a profound question that was raised by the early church fathers. And part of the reason why some argued it was necessary for God to become a man to accomplish in a temporal amount of time the satisfying the justice of God that is spent out over eternity with people who end up paying for their own crimes against God. Um, Strictly speaking, it isn't dying for 3 days that rescues us from the wrath of God. Um, it is the punishment that God the Father meted out on Jesus the Son during the 3 hours that he hung on the cross on Calvary, in which time God poured out his anger and wrath um, towards sin on Jesus, who was a substitute. How could he satisfy the eternal debt that we all owed to the Father? He could only do that if he was the God man. He had to have some quality beyond the fact that he was a mere man in order to accomplish this thing. Um, Lest somebody think that it's just being dead 3 days, and what's the big deal about that? It is the anguish that was experienced by the God man himself, Jesus of Nazareth, by the eternal God pouring out his wrath upon Jesus during that time, that provides rescue from God's wrath. Um, in fact, the equation isn't how could he do it, but he did do it so that we ought to then have a sense of what the intensity or the power or the magnitude of that suffering must have been like for Jesus to endure in a temporal period of time. I mean, it's beyond us. Uh, but it is one of the things that the early writers, and here I'm thinking of Anselm, who wasn't that early, actually, right around 1000 AD, who wrote Why the God Man? And as I recall, this was part of his argument. You needed a God man in order to do what Jesus did, to satisfy the eternal wrath of God in a temporal time.